keep on task because, as most of you know, if I get to talk to you about something I'm passionate about, I can just keep on talking, and I want to respect our time. So I think there are going to be 2 speakers after myself, so I'll get right into it. But welcome to Spencer Pride Community Center and our first ever World AIDS Day service. We're really excited to have you today. I'm humbled to be here in the shadow of a piece of the world famous Memorial AIDS Quilt. This is just a small piece of the overall quilt, and I know that Ed, one of our other speakers, is going to talk a little bit more about the quilt, so I won't get a lot into detail there. But I wanted to reflect a little bit upon HIV and the AIDS pandemic and the impact that it's had upon our lives and upon the face of our entire planet. So I certainly want to acknowledge Ed Brandon, who is the reason for the quilt coming here to Spencer, Indiana. This is the first time that a piece of the Memorial AIDS Quilt has been in Owen County, and we're really excited to have it. And Ed made both a volunteer time commitment as well as a financial commitment to bring it here, and coordinated with a few other locations so that we could really maximize the amount of people who had the opportunity to see it. So for those of you who are familiar with our community center, we are open currently Wednesday through Saturday, Sundays this December, but we are also not open the remainder of the week. So Ed coordinated with the Owen County Public Library to offer it for display on Monday and Tuesday, and with the Owen County Courthouse on Wednesday, so that we were able to, every day except Thanksgiving this week, have it on display for the public. So really want to thank Ed, who was elected back in August to our board of directors as our first ever health and wellness director. So thank you, Ed. So Spencer Pride, for those of you who are not maybe as familiar with us, we've been working in the community for the last 13 years in order to make Indiana a more welcoming place for all people, including those who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and beyond. We're also especially appreciative of our ally community, who make up the majority of our over 100 volunteers that we have on an annual basis. Without them, we couldn't do the work that we do. And we were excited to be able to open this community center just over 3 years ago, when we had the opportunity here to have such a good visible presence and offer our services and expand our work here in the heart of our community. Our center does provide free HIV screening on a monthly basis through our partner IU Health Positive Link, and so that's available on the 3rd Wednesday of every month. And so if you want any more information about that, you can speak with Ed. You can also speak with Jacob, who's our community center director. So again, today I want to reflect a little on the profound impact of the HIV and AIDS pandemic. A little bit of background, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So the human immunodeficiency virus, otherwise known as HIV, is a virus that gradually destroys the immune system by attacking and eliminating a type of white blood cell called a CD4 cell. CD4 cells play a major role in the body against battling infection. HIV is spread by the contact of some bodily fluids from a person with HIV. It can't be spread through saliva or tears, and it can be spread from a mother to her child during pregnancy, childbirth, or breastfeeding. AIDS, or the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, is the late stage of HIV infection that occurs when the body's immune system is badly damaged because of the virus. Without treatment, the average survival time after infection with HIV is estimated to be 9 to 11 years. And untreated, the diagnosis of AIDS is 6 months to 19 months. There are ways to prevent HIV transmission. There are medications to prolong and improve the lives of those who are living with HIV, but there is no cure. Here in Indiana, HIV and AIDS became a topic of much greater discussion with some media attention surrounding Hoosier Ryan White. Ryan was diagnosed with AIDS following a blood transfusion in December 1984 at age 13. When he was diagnosed, the doctors predicted that he would live for 6 months. After his diagnosis, when he tried to return to his school in his hometown of Kokomo, he fought AIDS-related discrimination. And alongside his mother, they rallied for the rights for him to attend school, and he certainly became the face of public education in the United States about this disease. Surprising his doctors, Ryan lived much longer than predicted. He died in April 1990 1 month before his high school graduation, and only months before Congress passed the legislation bearing his name in August of 1990. Growing up in Indiana myself, I can speak to the very limited resources, especially at the time of my upbringing, about HIV and AIDS. It was not something widely spoken about, much less taught about in schools. As we all know, lacking the facts about a disease can be very dangerous. As a young boy, I knew of AIDS, but I honestly thought that AIDS was something that happened when two men had sex. Just like when a man and a woman has sex, they have a baby. The story of Ryan White helped me understand the disease more. But let's be honest, by the time that I became aware of HIV and AIDS as a child, and by the time Hoosier Ryan White died at age 18, millions had already died of the disease worldwide. The first clinical diagnosis of AIDS took place in June of 1981, although the disease wasn't called AIDS until late 1982. It had several names, including GRID, which stood for Gay-Related Immune Deficiency, and the 4-H disease, named for the 4 initial communities where it was most prevalent: heroin users, hemophiliacs, Haitians, and homosexuals. HIV and AIDS spread rapidly. While it's not a gay disease, it has had a disproportionate effect upon the gay community. According to the British Academy, in the United States by 1995, 1 gay man in 9 had been diagnosed with AIDS, 1 in 15 had died, and 10% of the 1.6 million men aged 25 to 44 who identified gay had died, a literal decimation of this cohort of gay men born between 1951 and 1970. In San Francisco alone, between 1970 and 1990, nearly half of the city's gay population was lost due to AIDS. High mortality within tight gay networks inspired the term multiple loss syndrome to capture the psychological toll of all these deaths. If you were a gay man, 18 to 40 years old during the 1980s, you've lived through the scars that AIDS left behind. World wars of the early, mid-20th century took a generation of men on the battlefields. And so AIDS took a generation of gay men from their loved ones. According to the CDC, around 40 million people have died of AIDS-related illnesses since the start of the pandemic. Somewhere between 75 and 90 million people have become infected in HIV during that same time. In 2018 alone, 1 million people died from AIDS-related illnesses worldwide. And at its peak in 2005, the disease took the lives of approximately 1.7 million people that year. Right now, 38 million people are living with HIV around the world. Let's consider some other facts. In the United States, women represent 1 in 4 people living with HIV. Gay and bisexual men are the population most impacted. And among all gay and bisexual men in the United States, African Americans are the racial ethnic group most affected by the disease. Nearly half of the people in the United States living with diagnosed HIV are age 50 and older. And keep in mind that almost all the HIV risk factors are the same for adults of any age, but older people are less likely to get tested. And worldwide, 1,000 girls and young women aged 15 to 24 years old become infected with HIV every day. 1,000. AIDS stigma exists around the world in a variety of ways, including ostracism, rejection, discrimination, and avoidance of HIV-inflicted people, compulsory HIV testing without prior consent or protection of confidentiality, violence against HIV-infected individuals or people who are perceived to be infected with HIV, and the quarantine of HIV-infected individuals. Stigma-related violence or fear of the violence prevents many people from seeking HIV testing, returning for their results, securing treatment, possibly turning what could be a manageable chronic illness into a death sentence and perpetuating the spread of HIV. The AIDS Memorial Quilt is one way that we can spread awareness of HIV and AIDS. It's a visible effort to help combat AIDS stigma. It's also a way for those who have lost loved ones to AIDS-related complications to process that loss. The panels that you see before you today represent 8 of the 40 million people who have died from AIDS-related complications since the start of the pandemic. Education is essential in the prevention, detection, and management of this disease. According to UNAIDS, in 2018, 79% of people living with HIV knew their status. Turned around, that means 1 in 5 people living with HIV don't know it. In Scott County, Indiana, just 5 years ago, health officials became aware of an HIV outbreak. Scott County, by the way, is similar in size to Owen County. Scott County had seen an average of only 1 HIV transmission each year. However, within a few months of becoming aware of this, more than 215 people had tested positive for HIV. These transmissions were rapidly occurring within the community of injection drug users. Although it wasn't yet known until 2014, the HIV outbreak had been occurring steadily since 2011. Budget cuts to local health services had resulted in the closure of the only HIV testing center in southeastern Indiana in 2013, preventing the ability of individuals to understand their status and thereby delaying treatment to those who had been unknowingly infected. In order to combat HIV and AIDS pandemic, we cannot allow things like this to happen. We must follow the data and employ science-based measures. We need to ensure that disease prevention and treatment programs are funded. We need to make sure that our elected officials know that this disease has not gone away and that it's important to continue funding research and development. We need to hold them accountable for their efforts, or lack thereof, in combating this disease. According to an October 4th, 2018 article in The Nation by Stephen Thrasher, I'm going to do a fairly long quote here, much of US society doesn't care about HIV infections or AIDS deaths, or about hepatitis infections or overdose deaths, when they're perceived to be happening to people who are Black, queer, and or immigrant. Scott County tardily registered as worthy of limited government intervention because it had 1 case of HIV for every 110 residents in a county that's 97% white. At the same time, the CDC projects that if current trends don't change, 1 in every 2 Black queer men will become HIV positive. And yet, government agencies are not mustering any kind of robust plan for communities in which HIV may be 50 times more prevalent than it ever was in Scott County, end quote. There were many opportunities to slow the spread of HIV in Scott County, but doing so involved measures that then Governor Mike Pence morally opposed. Although Governor Pence eventually came around to act on some of the recommendations made by the medical community, it was too little and too late to help those who were impacted here in Indiana. The impact of HIV and AIDS affects us all. We need to stop thinking of AIDS as a disease that happens to the gays, or to drug users, or African Americans, or any other population. It's happening to our planet, to our country, to our community. It's happening to us. The Scott County example aside, we have improved the quality of life for many of those living with HIV. We have reduced the number of annual transmissions and reduced the number of AIDS-related deaths on an annual basis. In every one of these successes, education is at the heart of the progress that's been made. I want to thank you for your participation in today's World AIDS Day service. I hope you'll find it to be informative, and I hope that you'll share the information that you learned today with others. By openly sharing the facts about HIV and AIDS, you'll be arming others with the tools needed to prevent its transmission. You'll also be helping to battle the significant HIV-related stigma that stifles further progress toward the ultimate elimination of this disease.
Thanks. Next speaker, I've asked my minister, Jimmy Moore from St. Mark's United Methodist Church, to come over and do a little, what the...
I heard that.
What, I wasn't being stature.
No, I don't belong.
But to speak about what it is to have AIDS and HIV in the religious community, and how there are certain churches who will arm in arm with those that are infected.
Yeah. So first, my wife, Mary Beth Morgan, and I are both pastors at St. Mark's United Methodist Church, which is on the east side on the bypass in Bloomington. And Ed, well, Deb was one of our leaders in our church, and Ed was kind enough that he's a part of our congregation as well. And we were fortunate enough to have this in our fellowship hall last week and in our sanctuary this week. And he and Ed and Mark Cox, who leads our Reconciling Ministries Task Force, and Mary Beth preached this morning. And as we commemorated World AIDS Day. So, So one of the things that I just want to say, just to get this out of the way, because those of you who read the newspaper will hear United Methodist Church and GLBTQI issues as not being in good places with each other. Just so you know, there are Christian churches that are much more welcoming and affirming of all people, of all of God's children, and we are one of those. Our United Methodist Church is divided on this point and probably will have something of a restructuring is the nice word, a split is the not nice word. This year's been going on for a couple of decades now, so just know that's happening. I just wanted to start first by talking about quilts. So I'm a Southern boy, I'm from Mississippi, and my grandmother was a very Southern grandmother. And she cooked delicious food, none of it was healthy at all. And she hugged. I mean, I want to say this well. She was not real tall, but she was big, and she had the kind of arms where the skin and the fat would kind of hang down on your arms. And when she hugged you, it was like you were just in a great big blanket, right? And she also made quilts. And what I know is the quilts were an extension of her hugs for her. So I grew up with a great preference for quilts over blankets. Blankets feel scratchy to me and can get too hot. Quilts feel warm on a cold night and cool if you can like turn the air conditioner on in the summer and get under the quilt, and it's smooth and it's cool and it's just perfect. Not that I know anything about that from personal experience. But what I didn't know, and it was a long time before I did learn it, is that quilts tell stories. So there are those who believe, I know this is not a universally accepted point, that the Underground Railroad, that some of the quilts would actually have symbols, like it was said that wrench meant get all your tools and get ready to go, right? A goose heading north would mean get ready to fly, because it's time to go. And a heart would mean somebody died on this journey. So remember that. So when Cleve Jones first conceived of this, right? If I'm taking your stuff here, if I say that, okay. In '77, and I think it was first begun in 1983. 77 was when they were to march after Harvey Milk and George Moscone, the mayor of San Francisco, were assassinated. And he saw the names of people who had been lost to age-related illnesses and other GLBTQI causes on boards, and he noted the power of that. So he and others came up with these ideas. But and Ed will tell you how many panels are around. I think of storage problems at our church. I just can't imagine how this is stored right now. It's huge, right? But one of the things that I read is that in 1988, this is when the quilt was stored in Atlanta, someone quietly delivered a panel that looked different from the other panels with a note. It was black, primarily black, and had white writing on it. And it was delivered with a note that says, "We hope this finds a way to be incorporated into the quilt when this disease has been eradicated." And the panel says, as some of you probably saw a documentary about this, the last one. We're not there yet. You just told us that, Jonathan. We're not at that point yet. And so part of what I want to say about that is there are many reasons why. There's dedicated research that is happening now. Attitudes are still not where they need to be. And what we say with confession is that often the church has been part of the problem with that. So this is my story. How do I want to say this? I'm happy to be a part of a church that is fully reconciling and affirming, and I wasn't always there. I grew up Southern Baptist with a very strong commitment to the things I learned in my church. Even had much of that when I came to Indiana, because and it's not all about Baptists. There are Baptists who are open and affirming as well. So just so you know that I know that. But I was in a fairly moderate, as it was called, Southern Baptist church. And one day, the chaplain of the hospital called, and he said, "There's a young man here. He's really sick." He didn't tell me what was wrong. There were still some privacy issues there, but he would like a pastor to come see him. He's Baptist. I think I want you to come. And so my colleague and I went over there that day and saw this fellow in the hospital. And I'm guessing he was probably your age, I'm guessing. And it was not easy, not difficult to see from the spots on his arms and body that he had AIDS. And so we chatted for a while and got to know each other for a little bit. And Then I just said to him, I said, it's kind of tough, right? He said, yeah, I'm dying. He said, I know it. I said, well, I know I've just gotten here, but right now it seems like you're all alone. Is there anybody with you? He said, no. I said, well, I wonder if there's anyone I can call. And he said, not really. I said, maybe I could call your family. And he said, they won't come. I said, why? He said, when I came out to them, they disowned me. I said, well, now that they know you're ill, we keep pressing, right? Now that they know you're ill, maybe they would think differently. He said, I called them. And he said, they're not coming. And then in what was, of course, at this point, I'm already, feeling what some of you are feeling now. I'm not telling the story. And he showed this amazing bit of compassion to them. He said, first, he said, they can't because this is what their church is telling them. And he said, they're doing the best they can. And, at this point I'm going, oh man, I can't understand how someone could be this generous. But the other thing I felt was, it's not just that churches, like any other church, can avoid a problem. We contribute to the problem. Because what we teach and what we practice makes a difference, one way or the other, in the way that we live. And so this is what I want to say. That is a hard story. Quilts tell stories. These stories say, wherever are those people you wish were there are people who will love you. There are people who will welcome you. There are people who will celebrate you and the things you love. And so I have to tell you, with AIDS in particular, you said it, Jonathan, really well. Even then, I was scared to go in that room when I knew what it was. And I'm thinking, because we really didn't know a lot, even at that point, but it was some of the fears I had were irrational. But what I will tell you is, church is about telling, and I think life, community of faith, life, is about learning to tell a better story. It's not hiding from the old story, but it's taking the threads of the old story and weaving it into a better one, so that you can see that there is a love that is not going to let you go, that's going to be with you when it is challenging, that is going to learn from everything that you have experienced. And part of what quilts do, part of what these stories do, is tell us, inform us, how to be people who can be warmed and cooled and known and loved. And that's what we try to do, and we are blessed, Mary Beth and I, because we have people in that place who know how to do church. They just know that their God welcomes everybody. And so this is what we try to do, Ed. And I just want to thank you all. Thank Ed for letting us have this experience in our congregation. But thank you all for what happens in Spencer, too. Because, I know Bloomington's over there and we're snobs over there, but I'll tell you what, people know about the Spencer Pride Festival. They know what a courageous and loving and affirming experience it is here. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for the gifts that you give to this town, to this county, to this region, and to this state, because these are lessons that we all need. Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Steve. So I am going to give you folks just a few more facts before I touch on the personal side to the quilt and what it means to me. So back in '87, when Cleve Jones gathered a group of people in San Francisco, both lovers, family members who would show up, co-workers, caregivers, and friends. In his garage, the first panels were made. The first display, there were just a little over 1,900 panels. Today, there are over 50,000 panels. The new stat that's out is one in 1996, which is the most accredited photograph of the quilt displayed on the Memorial Lawn in DC. That's the last time that the quilt was shown in its entirety. It is now far too big to be shown at one location. If you were to see the quilt in one location, it would take, and spend 1 minute per, it would take you 34 days to view the quilt. The quilt now is 1.3 million square feet. Think about the size of your house and do the math. I was there on the onset of HIV/AIDS. Fortunately for me, I was in Atlanta, Georgia from 82 to 86 during my culinary studies. Being part of the gay community and going out, I heard the plea. So I went and volunteered for 4 years with the CDC while they were trying to figure out what the hell is this disease that's killing so many people and so rapidly killing people. Those early days, we refer to those as our dark days. I was with HIV positive folks who at that time, our only medication was AZT. The side effects were horrendous. AIDS is a wasting disease. AZT caused thrush in your mouth and your throat, so people didn't want to eat. And so they were wasting faster. As we would take men from the street into the hospitals there in Atlanta, we were quarantined. I remember one day, the doctor came in, and I said, "You're too late. He's dead." In the waiting rooms of physicians who are to care for people, doesn't matter. But everybody was so afraid of this disease. So I got through that, having buried in Atlanta over 4 years, in excess of 250 folks. Oftentimes, it was the bar crowd that was there at the funeral because parents wouldn't show up. I'm very thankful this panel arrived. When I put the request in, I have 2 panels that I personally made. And Gary Kirsch was my next door neighbor, florist in town from Missouri. And I had known Gary for, 10, 12 years. And during his final days, once the AIDS syndrome has taken his body and there was no medication at that time to slow that down and actually bring you back into an HIV status like we have today. Gary, being a florist, loved all types of flowers, and then the duck border, the month before Gary died, he was redoing his bathroom, and that's the border that he was putting in his bathroom. 3 days before Gary died, he called me. Everybody who was a friend of Gary's had a small craft jar that had pimento cheese in it. Y'all remember those? Or pineapple cream cheese in them? Everybody that Gary would socialize with on a regular basis, we all had one of those jars, which also acted as a glass in our cabinet with his favorite Glenlivet 12-year-old. Gary made the call. I said, "Yes, I'll be there." And he's in the hospital. And I was met at the door by the nurse. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "What? He's going to be gone soon. He called me. This is his request. Step back." And so I went in. We had a glass of scotch together, and 3 days later, Gary was gone. His family would not allow any of his friends to attend that funeral. His family, being of staunch Catholic religion, said Gary died of cancer. It wasn't until 5 years after he was gone that they finally admitted that it was AIDS. The other panel was for Stan Eckert. Very similar story to what Jimmy told. I'd known Stan before I went to Atlanta, and I came back, and I started the first buddy system, helped start the first buddy system in Missouri. And then that grew into RAIN, which is Regional AIDS Interfaith Network, which was compassionate care offered by several congregations. And our first client was Stan. So I went early before the chairman of the, or the chairwoman of the organization was to meet me at Stan's apartment. And I knock on the door and Stan yells, "Come in," and I see him and I said, "So what's going on with you now?" He pats his bed, so I go over and sit on the bed, and Anita Dierenderner was the lady. And she walked in and she stopped, dead in her tracks. She carried on this little bit of a conversation. I still had a conversation with Stan, and as we left, she said, "Why were you on his bed? Aren't you aware that he has full-blown AIDS?" I said, "I'm very much aware. I'm not going to catch it sitting on his bed, I'm sorry to say." So there was tons of education that needed to happen then as well as now. As Stan got weaker, I asked him, I said, "Stan, what do you want? What can I give you? Do not let me die by myself." When I got the call, I went to Stan's apartment, and I was the only one there. I don't understand how families can turn their back on someone who is sick, and there is no cure. Today, we have HIV positive in the US. There are recorded 1.1 million people living with HIV. That's the population of Rhode Island. We have lost just under 500,000. That's the population of Wyoming. So as much as where we've been and where we still need to go, the drugs on the street, or the drugs that are available for the people on the street with HIV, are doing wonders. But as Jonathan spoke, our government loves to keep folks in some type of suppression, because those drugs now run an average of between $20,000 and $30,000 a year. Insurances often cap that, and so many people of the demographic of HIV can't afford insurance. So the thing is, we need a lot with Congress and the people in Washington, and they have their own issues right now, but it's education is paramount. And the thing that gets me is the youth today. When I used to really be on the circuit and talking about HIV AIDS into different school health classes, the thing that stopped me in my tracks one day, I took questions and answers at the end of the class, and one kid said, "Why are you here? Why are you here talking to us?" That's an old gay man's disease. And I said, "That's why I'm here talking to you, because you don't understand that you are at risk thinking that you're invincible. You're at risk thinking that you don't have to use that condom, and that one time could be your last time." So education will get us where we need to go. Funding will get us where we need to go. But the one thing that this disease has that no other disease has is we don't have a cure. And Jimmy also said about the last panel, and our slogan is, "Until there is a cure." Until then, we wait. We comfort, we educate, we try to put families back together at a very vulnerable state, and do the best we can. I'm very pleased to have been able to bring this to Spencer, to Owen County, because rural education is paramount. They would not let me in at the high school. I called, they said absolutely not. This ribbon that I'm wearing, I was wearing into one of the rural schools in Missouri where I happened to go. The superintendent stopped me at the front doors and said, I can't let you in the school wearing that pin. And I said, "What? I'm sorry, what?" And he said, "We don't have that here." A year later, I went back into that same school and he said, will you teach a class? So education, again, is where we need to go with this disease. With that, I'm not going to keep you all any longer. I truly appreciate you all coming out for the first World AIDS Day service here at the community center. You guys have been a blessing to get to know, and I truly appreciate what you do for our community. Thank you.